Grateful rising, peace and blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining in today as we add to our Mastery of Plant series sponsored by HPOC University. My name is ZAIRE SABB. I am one of the instructors as well as the department chair for the herbalism program, and I thank you for joining me today. Today's conversation, we're going to discuss plant allies for stress, sleep, and the nervous system, the nervines, adaptogens, and rituals for restoration. Because this is something that sometimes, even though it's a hot topic, most times it's something that is often not quite overstood in terms of interconnectedness. And I want to make sure to take the time out today to um, to make sure that we understand how point A, point B, and point C all work together, okay? So one thing I want you to know starting out is that this lecture, what we're going to talk about today, is not about fixing yourself or optimizing your nervous system. It is literally about listening and understanding what your body needs and how plants can be used to help restore balance, restore safety, as well as rest. Now, anybody listening, you know that we are living in a time where we are burnt out, we are anxious, we have, sleep disruption has been completely normalized, and everybody, even the babies, are exhausted, they're wired, or just maybe even numb to everything that's going on around them, and then turn around and get blamed for being that. Okay. And I want to be very clear. These situations, the burnout, anxiety, and all that, it is not a personal failure. Okay. I'm gonna repeat that. You being burnt out, overly anxious, overly wired, having sleep disruptions, it is not a personal failure. It is a result of systemic societal realities. Okay. And the nervous system is going to respond a certain way to prolonged stress, trauma, inevitably putting you in a consistent survival mode, fight or flight type of regulation. Okay. So, what does all this really mean? Well, let's talk about chronic stress. Okay. So, what we're really talking about is something called allostatic load. Okay. Allostatic load refers to the cumulative wear and tear of the nervous system and the body as it occurs. So when stress responses are activated too frequently for too long and they don't get a chance to recover, that's when you have what's called the allostatic load. So the body is designed to handle stress. Okay. It's designed to handle stress in a sprint or short bursts. It's not designed or set up to have prolonged stress that lasts hours, weeks, days, years, decades. It's not made to do that. Okay. So when we talk about something being chronic, it means that it's something that's constantly there. It may or may not have flare-ups. It may or may not have points where uh, there's highs and lows, but it's something that's always there beneath the surface. Okay. So whether that stress comes from trauma, systemic inequities, caregiver demands, or just being constantly on, the nervous system never gets the signal that it's safe to just stop and breathe and rest. And when you're in that constant state, one, just know that it's not sustainable. Um, the sustained activation begins to dysregulate multiple body systems all at once. Everything from your neurological systems to your hormonal systems, your immune systems, as well as your metabolic systems. Okay. So from this lens, this is what's often labeled as dysregulation. And understand, it is not a pathology. Okay. Being dysregulated is not a pathology. What it is actually your body trying to adapt to all the outliers or all the external and or internal um, realities that are causing the disruption. Okay. So the nervous system is doing exactly what it's trained to do, to stay alert, stay ready, and stay alive. Now, the problem is not the response itself. The problem is that the environment no longer allows for the completion of the stress cycle. It's just more stuff on top of more stuff on top of more stuff. Okay. Sleep disruption is one of the clearest and quickest markers of this particular process. And it's not just, being fatigued all day or poor sleep hygiene. This often looks like neuroendocrine imbalance. And what that means is we're talking about cortisol rhythms flatten or spike at the wrong times, melatonin, which is a enzyme the brain makes to help get into your deeper REM sleeps. Its release has now become impaired. The body remains in a state of nighttime vigilance, even when exhaustion is present. Okay. So when someone says they can't sleep, we shouldn't immediately ask what they are doing wrong, but more so ask what their nervous system has learned to expect and how long have they been living, without the consistent safety, rest, and repair. So our primary pathway um, of the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve. Okay. The vagus nerve acts as a communication highway between the brain and the body. It sends signals that tell the heart to slow down, the gut to digest, inflammation to decrease, and the body to rest. So the parasympathetic system is also known as your rest and digest. You may hear me say that on and off throughout the rest of this conversation. It's totally interchangeable. Okay. So when our vagal tone is healthy, the body has a greater capacity to be calm, to digest, emotionally regulate, and to sleep. Now, the system can move fluidly between activation and rest. Stress itself is not the problem. Stress is a normal biological response. Okay. And I'm pretty sure everybody has heard at some point that the body does not discern between types of stress, right? Meaning, if you won $1 billion versus you having a deadline at your job or a deadline, uh, yeah, a deadline at your job, the stress that both of those put into like causes in your body doesn't discern that, oh, this is good stress because I won money, or this is bad stress because I'm up against a deadline. It just cumulatively puts it together in a big bucket called stress. Okay. Um, and what happens is that if there's never a chance for you to calm down or just come down off the high, that adrenaline high, that's when we get into that prolonged survival mode and our ability to dysregulate or that vagal tone starts to reduce. Okay. So the parasympathetic system starts to lose its influence, and then the sympathetic nervous system remains dominant. So our parasympathetic is rest and digest. Our sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight. Okay. Um, and even when there's no immediate danger, the body continues to behave as if there was a threat present. Okay. So let's look at what this looks like. Chronic sympathetic dominance, which again is your fight or flight, has measurable psychological consequences. It increases the systemic inflammation, it disrupts glucose metabolism, it strains the adrenal system, and it places continuous demand on the cardiovascular and immune system. So, in layman terms, what does this mean? We have constant anxiety, digestive dysfunction, which could be either uh, constipation, stomach pains, uh, food sensitivities or intolerances. We also have hormonal disruptions, meaning we have increased estrogen stores or decreased testosterone stores, depending on if you're male or female. We're talking about chronic fatigue, and we're also looking at sleep disturbances. So understand, sleep disturbances are going to bed and having ruminating thoughts for hours. It's not being able to get a deep enough sleep. It's getting to sleep and then waking up, then not being able to go back to sleep. It's, it's multiple variations of that particular type of reality. Okay. So understand that the body's not failing anything, at least not yet. Eventually, if you continue in this way, the body will start to fail. However, it's primarily just the body adapting to the environment that it's perceiving as unsafe. Okay. So the goal of the nervous system healing is not to necessarily eliminate stress. The goal is to restore the vagal tone, reestablish parasympathetic capacity, and help the body to learn how to complete the stress cycle and return to safety. Now, that's the goal. That's what we're working for. Now let's talk about our limbic system or our brain, right? When the limbic system perceives threat, whether it's a physical threat, emotional threat, relational, or even systemic, the stress response is initiated before the thinking brain has time to evaluate what's happening. All right, so this can feel like stress even when we know we're safe. Okay. Cortisol is one of the primary messengers in this process, and in a healthy system, cortisol follows a daily rhythm, meaning you have a spike in the morning, which helps you get up and get your day started, and then you have a decreased amount of cortisol in the evening, which allows you to sleep and go, rest and go to sleep. Now, when you're under chronic stress, that causes a disruption. Okay, so your cortisol levels may remain elevated at night, flatten out through the day, or spike unknowingly, keeping the body in a constant state of alertness. Okay, the vagus nerve helps regulate this response by communicating safety signals from the body back to the brain. Okay. When the vagal tone is reduced, the stress signals linger longer than necessary, and the vagal tone can start to downshift more easily. Okay. Another key player is the endocannabinoid system, or your ECS. Okay. This system acts as a regulatory network that helps bring the body back into balance after stress. And so the ECS helps modulate the stress response, reduce excessive inflammation, and it helps to support mood regulation and facilitate that recovery. Again, when we're going back to chronic stress, the ECS signals can become depleted or dysregulated, making it harder for the body to self-soothe and return to a baseline. And this is why reassurance alone doesn't work sometimes. You can't talk to, you cannot talk this nervous system out of a stress response that is being driven by the limbic memory, hormonal signaling, or the physiological pattern. Meaning, if a person is in, if they live in a certain type of stress, whether it be again, stuff at work, stuff in the house, just internal self-sabotage type talking, just saying calm down never works. Never works. Okay. So when we approach stress as communication, sorry, when we approach stress as communication and not weakness, we can do things like we can have conversations like, why can't I calm down? These are what you're asking yourself, right? What is my body asking for, and what conditions would allow it to feel safe enough to settle? Okay. Um, so from a functional medicine lens, let's look at what this does. When the body is under chronic stress, the cortisol is released repeatedly instead of rhythmically. So understand this is the difference between it's put like this. Let's say you got your sink, right? You're at your sink and you're gonna wash dishes because you just finished breakfast. So you turn the water on, turn the water off. Lunchtime happens and you turn the water on to wash the dishes, then you turn it off. Then you go to dinner and you make your dinner, you wash your dishes, you turn the water, turn it off, right? That is rhythm, okay? When you're in chronic stress, it's like having a leaky faucet and it's like a slow drip all day, okay? And anyone who's ever had a leaky faucet, you know that when you have that leaky faucet, if you plug it up, by the end of the day, the sink is full. Okay. So literally that's what's happening with cortisol when you're constantly under stress. Okay. These repeated the repeated cortisol spikes are meant to be short-term survival responses. And when it doesn't do that, it creates inflammation and disrupts the pancreas from being able to do what it does, which is regulate blood sugar. Okay. In this inflammatory state, it changes how hormones are metabolized. So one of the key shifts we see a lot is increased estrogen activity, either because estrogen clearance is impaired or because cortisol-driven inflammation increases the conversion of hormones into estrogen. Okay. So as estrogen becomes dominant, it suppresses or dysregulates other hormones like progesterone, testosterone, or your thyroid hormones. Okay. And this further slows down the metabolism and increases fat storage. So now we're talking about adipose tissue, love handles, back fat, all that kind of stuff. Adipose tissue is not just some random inert thing, right? The fat cells are endocrine organs. Understand that. It comes from the endocrine system, right? And they store and they actively produce estrogen. So as adipose tissue increases, estrogen signaling increases as well. And this creates a feedback loop or a conversation that stress drives cortisol. Cortisol fuels inflammation. Inflammation increases estrogen dominance, and adipose tissue amplifies estrogen signaling, feeding back into the nervous system, stress and hormonal imbalance. Okay, so that's one of the biggest reasons why our nervous system regulation is not separate from our hormonal health. You cannot resolve estrogen dominance, metabolic dysfunction, or chronic inflammation without addressing physiological and restoring nervous system balance. Okay, so let's talk about real quick what that actually looks like. I know I said a lot. Okay, chronic stress, repeated cortisol spikes causes inflammation and insulin resistance, which increases estrogen activity, which increases the amount of adipose tissue, which then the adipose tissue stores estrogen and produces estrogen, and then it goes back into the hormone and nervous system as stress. So in men, what that looks like is low testosterone levels, those adipose tissue or the development of breasts because now they have higher estrogen than what their DNA mandates. Could even develop even to some kind of cancers. Okay. For women, we're looking now at fibroids. Okay. Fibroids is one of the biggest things that, well, not biggest things, but one of the biggest estrogen dominant pathologies that settle into our womb space. Okay. So just so you know, started out here in the atmosphere and now has pathologized into the real world, and that's what it looks like. Okay. So one of the things that we need to talk about is getting sleep. That's our first thing, right? Our first thing that we can do to help break the constant uh stress loop that we're under. Okay. Um, from a physiological standpoint, chronic stress disrupts the circadian rhythms that governs the sleep-wake cycles. Okay. Cortisol, which should naturally decline in the evening, may remain elevated or spike at night. Melatonin release becomes blunted or mistimed. The body stays in mobilization mode when it should be transitioning into repair. Excuse me. Now, for individuals with a history of trauma, caregiving overload, systemic stress, prolonged survival states, working at night versus the daytime, the nighttime can actually feel more threatening. And then the quiet and the stillness, and that loss of distraction can activate stored nervous energy, okay, or nervous system memory. So this is why reassurance doesn't by itself doesn't restore sleep. The thinking brain may know it's safe. I'm in my house, all the doors are locked, I'm good. But the nervous system, okay, does not yet, it hasn't really got the messages yet. Okay, so safety hasn't been established. So for many people, sleep disruption is not necessarily the root issue. It's the smoke, not the fire, so to speak, right? And it's a signal that the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the circadian rhythms are out of alignment. So when we understand this, our goals as practitioners, or even just, working with other family members, this is where that goal starts to shift. We stop trying to force sleep and start creating the physiological conditions that allow the body to feel safe enough to get some rest. Okay. Now, this is my favorite part. Y'all know me. I'm a big plant geek. What plant categories matter? Okay. One of the biggest things that I just talk about in my classes is, it's knowing the herbal actions. Herbal actions are what categories plants work in. Okay. Because if you know the herbal actions that you want to use, you could literally go anywhere on the planet and find a plant that could help you in that particular space. Okay. So the three primary plant categories for stress that support stress, sleep, and the nervous system regulation are going to be nervines, adaptogens, and hypnotics. These are all our sleep allies. Okay. Each of these groups do a very different job. So your nervines work by restoring and nourishing the nervous system. And they are especially helpful when the system is depleted, frayed, or just chronically overextended. So we're looking at people who are burnt out. Okay. Maybe they may not have like a full burnout episode yet, but they are definitely going in that direction. Then we have adaptogens. Adaptogens help the body respond differently to stress. They don't necessarily calm the nervous system, but what they do is they buffer the stress response and support the resilience over time. And that's the beautiful thing about adaptogens is that the adaptogens helps the body adapt, right? It helps it technically get its life together. Okay. So now we're talking about hypnotics, all right? And hypnotics are designed to support sleep onset or depth, but they must be used with intention, okay? Because the reality is that you could legitimately harm somebody. Even though it's a plant, it can still have an adverse effect, okay? Um, and hypnotics are not meant to replace nervous system regulation, and they're not for long-term use, okay? When we use a hypnotic for a depleted nervous system, we override the ability for it to restore itself. So it really needs to be used in conjunction with, okay? Now, when we use adaptogens for, like, to say, acute anxiety, we may miss the need for soothing. And then when we rely only on nervines for stress load, we may not give the body enough support to adapt. So the reality is you want to make sure if you're working with somebody that has like a really intense nervous system dysregulation, you really want to hit it on all levels, okay? Um, what does that look like in real time? You could give somebody, two different formulas, one to help take them off the edge, and then one that helps them get into a deeper REM or deeper sleep, okay? So one of the things that we want to do before we choose a plant, we want to ask what calms. Not what calms, but what does the nervous system need right now? And when plant categories are matched correctly, then we have created a formula or we're effectively using the plants. Okay. Now, at the same time, when they're mismatched, it can cause the system to go into a frenzy and create a dependency instead of healing. Okay. Now let's look a little deeper into these categories. So we have our nervines. They are to restore and soothe. And we think about nervines in two subcategories: tropic nervines and relaxant nervines, right? So tropic nervines are deeply restorative. They help rebuild nervous tissue, they improve nervous signaling, and they restore baseline resilience. Plants that typically fall into this category are going to be your milky oats, especially when they're harvested fresh. Milky oats, I love this plant. I've used it a lot, honestly, and it's ideal for nervous systems that may be or exhausted. Maybe they're feeling just like they have like very low capacity. Okay. So the thing about Milky Oats is that it doesn't force calmness. It just helps to restore capacity. It's just like, okay, give me a second. Just let me take a beat. Okay. Now, relaxing nervines help to ease tension, agitation, nervous system overactivity. And the good thing about it is that it doesn't suppress the functions. Okay. So we're looking at plants like lemon balm, skullcap, one of my favorite pairings. They're a great example of this. So lemon balm will soothe the nervous system while supporting mood and digestion, making it, very helpful, excuse me, when you have a person who has a gut dysregulation because of their anxiety. Okay. Skullcap is very, very useful when a person's mind won't shut off. Like those people who go to sleep and they sitting there ruminating, or they're having racing thoughts, or they just can't keep their brain from just moving. Okay. Um, and also who have like looping thoughts, right? Uh, with skullcap, the persistent tension goes away. Okay. And these plants work slow and they work gently. Now, I say that, and I will still say that that doesn't mean you can't give somebody this for the first time. And the first time they have it, their body just activates and they finally get the good night's sleep that they've been trying to get. Okay. Um, with nervines, regardless if they're trophic or relaxing, these are the ones that we're going to use as a tonic. And a tonic is simply a formula that you use consistently over time, okay? Because they require consistency, right? Their power is not the immediate sedation, even though it could happen. That's not their overall goal, okay? But the goal is the long-term restoration of tone, resilience, and regulation. These particular categories are looking for the marathon, not the sprint. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why the nervines work the way they do is that they create the physiological conditions that allow for other interventions. Like if we're going to, like when we pair it with adaptogens or the hypnotics and or lifestyle changes, this is what makes it work, right? So when we are working with, systems that are like just all over the place, maybe working with somebody who's in the middle of postpartum, maybe they have long stress histories or just chronic nervous exhaustion. This is where I typically start, and I would suggest you start, giving them something to help for the long run. Now, moving on, we're going to talk about adaptogens. First of all, let me just say, for anybody listening that is a practitioner, anybody who builds comes up with formulas or anything like that, every formula you have, it doesn't matter what it is, should have a adaptogen in it, at minimum one. Okay. And the reason being is, again, adaptogens help the body adjust. Okay. Now, when we are specifically looking for buffering of the stress response, we're looking at those who are chronically stressed. Maybe they're burnt out. Maybe they're just running on fumes, right? And so the nervous system now has been overactivated for too long, right? Um, Ashwagandha, oh my gosh, it's one of my go-to adaptogens when I'm looking or working with somebody that's specifically in burnout, or they have that stress sleep overlap, especially when they're presenting with being highly overexhausted. Okay. Ashwagandha will help with that adrenal overkill that happens when a person is in a fight or flight mode. It helps to ease it down. Okay. Holy basil, another great one, works beautifully for emotional stress, grief, or even spiritual fatigue. It can be uplifting and not stimulating, and it's protective. Okay. Reishi, another lovely nervous system teacher. It helps to support sleep, increases the immunity, emotional regulation. Sasandra berry is another one. It's a great one for containment. It helps when energy is leaking in too many directions, like when people feel scattered, maybe they're overstimulated, or maybe unable to hold themselves together under pressure. Okay. All of this stuff, easy stuff, helping the body deal with what's happening to it. Okay. Adaptogens don't calm the stress. They just teach the body how to respond differently to it. Okay. So now we're going to talk about hypnotics and sleep allies. So I'm going to talk about hypnotics, but I want you to understand the comparison. Okay. So when we're looking at herbal actions, we're looking at three different categories when we're talking about sleep allies. Okay. We're talking about, believe it or not, your analgesics. Okay. Sometimes a person can't sleep just because they're in pain. Okay. So an analgesic is literally something that will take the edge off, but it doesn't make you drowsy. Okay. So if you were going to correlate that to over-the-counter medications, you're going to be looking at your standard dosing of Tylenol, maybe Motrin, maybe some Aleve. Okay. Your next, excuse me, your next category of hypnotics would be your sedatives. Your sedatives are your plants that will make you drowsy. Okay. If you're going to correlate that to medication, that could be your Tylenol 3, that could be your Aleve PM, your Advil PM, anything that has like PM on it, because it will make you drowsy. And then you have your hypnotics. Your hypnotics are going to knock you out. Okay. So we're talking about, again, if we're correlating to over-the-counter medications, we are talking about Ambien, Lunesta, things of that nature, things that are made to make you go to sleep. Okay. Now, when we're talking about how we're using this in the plant world, my favorites are passion flower. Okay. It is a excellent, excellent, excellent anxiety driven insomnia uh plant, meaning it works very good for those people who suffer from insomnia because of anxiety. Okay. When the mind won't shut off, right? The nervous system can't soften. And remember, I just talked about skull cap. So, like one of my formulas, it literally has skull cap and it has passion flower in it. Okay. And the cool thing about passion flower is that anybody who actually grows passion flower, what you're using is the leaf. Okay. And literally all you need is 3 or 4 leaves. Make a tea with it. Bam. There you go. Okay. Valerian root is also very helpful, but it needs to be used with caution because some people, while it grounds them, it could cause others to be overstimulating. So this is definitely not a one size fits all plant. However, valerian root is also a very good hypnotic that will get a person to get deeper into their REM sleep. Okay. Another one is California poppy. It's very gentle, very supportive, especially for those who are overtired, emotionally sensitive, or holding tension in their body rather than in their mind. Okay. So that would look like people who have very stressful jobs, like maybe they're a firefighter, or maybe they work in the medical field, or maybe they're a cop, right? They're dysregulated because of all the things that they got to deal with. And that goes into that like emotional sensitivity and just that psychic self-defense, right? Matching the herb to the cause. Like this is the most important part. We have to match the herb to why the sleep is disrupted. You have to ask these questions. Well, why can't you sleep? Is it because you're up scrolling, doing the social media scroll? Are you thinking about, what's going to happen tomorrow? Are you afraid to, like, why? Why? Okay. And once we understand the why, the plant choice not only becomes evident, it becomes ethical, effective, and restorative. So now we're talking about actual healing. Okay. Um, let's talk real quickly about trauma. Okay. Trauma does not live only in our thoughts or memory. It legitimately lives in our nervous system, right? And trauma is best understood as stored survival energy. The body's learning how to stay alive when it did not feel safe. Okay. And because of that, this is why trauma sometimes will show up long after the actual initial insult has passed. The thinking brain may not know the danger is over, but the body continues to respond as if it isn't. Okay. The nervous system remembers through sensation, tension, vigilance, collapse, sleep disruption, all the things. This is also kind of where your PTSD comes in. Okay. Folks, like a good example, I'll always bring this up. A good example of PTSD is melanated people being like not being able to swim. Okay. People who have always lived on the continent of Africa, They have no problem swimming. Melanated people who are the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, a good portion of them have a issue swimming. The trauma of the water has rewritten the DNA. That's why a lot of your melanated people, diasporans, don't swim. They're afraid of water. Like their initial thing is, I'm afraid of water. Okay. That's what that looks like. Um, trauma could also be, uh, trauma could also be, your, of course, your assaults and things of that nature. It could also be maybe when you were growing up, you were told to sit and eat your food by yourself. No one sat with you. There was no conversations. There was nothing there. You just sit in the corner by yourself, eat your food, and get out and go do something else. Now, years later, you have a eating disorder based around that. That's all trauma. Okay. So the thinking brain, again, may not know the danger is over, but the body continues to respond as if it isn't. Okay. And this is also, so this is, other thing I just said is why when you tell someone to relax, it often will backfire. Relaxation requires safety. And if this nervous system does not perceive safety, then the commands to calm down can feel invalidating or even be threatening. A dysregulated nervous system does not need discipline. It doesn't need willpower, and it definitely doesn't need self-control. It needs safety, repetition, and gentleness. Plants play a powerful role here because they don't work. I'm sorry, because they work directly with the physiology. Nervines help to nourish and soften. Adaptogens buffer the stress response, and sleep allies support restoration when it's used appropriately. Ritual and rhythm reinforce predictability, teaching the body that is no longer in danger. So when we add together plants, ritual, and rhythm to help restore the nervous system, we're actually reteaching our body. We're reteaching our nervous system what safety feels like, not intellectually, but somatically. So the healing begins to happen when the body is given enough consistent signals that it can finally stand down and not be on alert. Um, And this is one of the reasons, again, why healing must be relational, rhythmic, and gentle. And also ritual. Okay. Now, let's talk about ritual. I just mentioned that. Let's talk about it. Ritual is a very powerful medicine. Okay. Ritual helps to create safety through consistency. It gives the nervous system a reliable container. Sometimes it can anticipate it and settle into it. A good example of that is newborn babies. One of the things that's always told to mothers is get a routine started. If 8 o'clock at night is the bedtime you want, then that means around 7, you start shutting down or start implementing um, rituals and routines that signals the baby and signal the baby's body that it's time to go to sleep. Whether it be something like um, maybe a soothing bath, maybe low lighting, soft music, story time, gentle massage. And now we're at, 7:45, and we're going to, turn the lights off. We're going to do our deep breathing. We're going to say our prayers to the ancestors, whatever it is. And then by 8 o'clock, eyes should be closing. Okay. That's a ritual. Okay. And it's training the body to start getting sleepy around that between 7 and 8 o'clock. Okay. Um, so when we do this, the nervous system becomes a reliable container, something that again, it can anticipate and settle into this rhythm. So plants work best when they are paired with this rhythm. An herb taken randomly has one effect. The herb taken as part of a daily ritual has another type of effect. The body doesn't just respond to the plant, it responds to the pattern. Okay. And another example for that is tea, evening tea. It's a signal. It tells the nervous system that the day is winding down and that stimulation is ending and that the restoration is approaching. Okay. So let's say, you adapt tea ritual before going to bed. You're not going to drink a tea that has like a lot of caffeine in it. You're not going to drink a green tea. You're going to drink maybe a chamomile tea, maybe a rose tea, maybe a tea that has like the skull cap, some California poppy in it, something that's just going to make you go, right? Just letting go of the day. Okay. And that's telling the system, the nervous system, that we're winding down. The stimulation of the day is ending and we are about to get our rest. Over time, the body begins to associate the taste, the temperature, and the timing with safety and rest. And that goes also to for, if you want to incorporate a herbal bath, foot soaks, lingam steams, yoni steams, breath work, dim lighting, something that's just consistent. Okay. Um, One of the things that I practice personally is that there's no TVs in the bedroom at all whatsoever. Because that blue light constantly keeps the pituitary gland and the pineal gland active. Okay. Same thing. Scrolling like the social media scroll on our phone. It does the same thing. That blue light, that flickering, all of that stuff keeps us in a state of dysregulation. Okay. So literally what you want to do is get into practice of, let's say your bed that you are making the thing that your bedtime is going to be 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, your goal is to be in bed and sleep. So that means like between 7 and 8, you're doing all the things. You're, finishing up the day, you're getting something to eat. If you got to walk the animals, you're walking the animals. And then you start doing your self-care practices. And that way, by the time you're in bed, by 9, you're in bed and you just go off to sleep. Okay. Um, Rituals teach the nervous system through this repetition, and it takes 21 days. 21 days to either break a habit or build a new habit. Okay. And it says that this moment is predictable. Nothing is being asked of you right now. You can let it go. And when that message is delivered consistently, the body begins to believe it and it will respond appropriately. Okay. Once that rhythm is restored, now we begin to assess what kind of nervous system support is actually really needed. So, a few minutes ago, I spoke a little bit about some things that are not necessarily not plant-based, but uses plants. But so let's talk about some things that are non-plant allies, right? Light is one of the strongest regulators of the nervous system and the circadian rhythm. Bright or blue light at night tells the brain to stay alert and suppresses the melatonin production. And again, melatonin is that enzyme that's created in the brain. Excuse me. Um, and it helps the body go into a deeper REM. Okay. And if you have that light on, what happens is that it doesn't allow the body to rest. Okay. So you want warm lighting in the evening that will signal that it's safe to begin to power down or dimming the light. Candlelight is a really good one. Some people even use rose quartz lamps to help. Okay. Sound. Sound is another one. You don't want loud, unpredictable noises that keep the nervous system in a scanning mode. You want just gentle, consistent sounds, a very intentional silence. Both of those can be used to support parasympathetic activation and emotional settling. That could be anything from listening to, 432 hertz binary beats, maybe 132 hertz binary beats. If you have one of those uh, environment sound machines that had like the water or maybe gentle rain or maybe, whatever. Sound helps. Okay. And then we have breath. It's one of the few direct ways we can influence the autonomic nervous system in real time. Slow, focused breathing. Okay. Extend the exhales. It stimulates the vagus nerve and helps the body downshift out of the fight or flight. Okay. Temperature is another powerful one. Warmth tends to signal safety and relaxation, while cold or fluctuating temperatures can keep the body alert. Warm baths, foot soaks, or even warm teas help cue the nervous system that it is time to soften. And again, this is where herbs alone are just not enough. A perfect tea will struggle to work if someone is, scrolling at night under the lights. surrounded by noise, have shallow breathing, or even a tense body. Okay. Now, I want to go back real quick to temperature because temperature is a very interesting thing. There is a balance. There is a perfect temperature for everybody. If it's too warm or too hot, then you can't sleep. If it's too cold, you can't sleep. So there is like this really interesting atmospheric pressure that helps everybody sleep. What that is, oddly enough, will vary from person to person, right? I will tell you that it tends to be on the cooler side. So literally, if maybe you put your thermostat to like 70 degrees at night, it actually will help you get into a deeper REM sleep. Because what happens is when it's colder atmospherically, you actually will bundle up to be warmer. Okay. And because you have that mismatched type of temperature situation happening, it allows your body to go into a deeper level REM. And once you hit that deeper level REM, that's when the body organs can start doing what they're doing, whether it be your liver, your pancreas, your lungs, whatever. Okay. Um, let's see where. So our existential environment teaches our nervous system that faster is not necessarily better. When we adjust the environment to support safety and rhythm, plant medicine becomes more effective, and the nervous system finally receives its permission to rest. Okay. All right. Now let's look at how to assess the the nervous system. Okay. When a nervous system is wired, it's stuck in activation mode, right? These are the individuals who may feel anxious, restless, easily startled, tired but wired. Um, Sleep is often light or maybe even fragmented, and there's a difficulty falling asleep because the mind and body just will not stop. It just won't shut off. And when they're in this state, the nervous system needs soothing, it needs the containment, it needs the safety. So forcing that energy or stimulation sometimes can actually make it worse. Okay. A collapsed nervous system is the exact opposite. Here, the system has dropped into exhaustion or shutdown mode, and people can feel depressed, foggy, unmotivated, um, or even chronically depleted. Okay. Um, in this state, the nervous system needs to gently rebuild and gently be nourished, not necessarily with strong sedation or hypnotics. It's the oscillating nervous system that it moves between. Someone may feel anxious and hypervigilant at times and then suddenly exhausted and shut down. Sleep can be inconsistent, mood swings, stress tolerance is unpredictable, just all the things. Okay. And this is often seen as a side effect of prolonged trauma or burnout. Okay. So the nervous system has lost its flexibility. Okay. So this assessment matters because different nervous system states require different support. A wired system needs soothing and rhythm. A collapsed system needs nourishment and slow rebuilding. The oscillating system needs consistency, containment, and careful pacing. Okay. Ask the questions. Okay. Even if the person can't even accurately explain what's happening to them, pay attention to what they're doing. What time are you waking up in the morning? When you wake up in the morning, do you feel rested? That's a huge one. Do you feel rested or do you feel groggy? Did you sleep? Now also too, there's a thing called sleeping too much. Okay. People wake up groggy, maybe their body hurts. That's another, variation of this. So when we assess the nervous system first, again, I'll say it once, I'll say it 1,000 times, the plant selection becomes clearer. We're not chasing symptoms. We are supporting the underlying state and healing becomes more sustainable. Okay. So what is this? Like, how does this look in like practical application? Okay. In most cases, the answers will fall into either you need to soothe the nervous system, we need to rebuild the nervous system, or we need to buffer it. Okay. When the nervous system is wired, it usually needs soothing. This means calming excess activation, easing tension, increasing signals of safety. Here, that's where you have your gentle nervines, your rhythm, your environmental support. All of those are going to be more effective than anything that is stimulating or forceful. Okay. When a nervous system is collapsed, it needs rebuilding. Okay. This is where nourishment, food is medicine, eutropic nervines, consistency, and patience matter the most. Again, the goal is not to energize, is to restore capacity. It's the capacity piece. Okay. And now, when we have a nervous system that is under chronic stress load, especially when someone is functional but depleted, again, postpartum moms, people in burnout from work, okay, um, they need buffering. This is where your adaptogens are most appropriate. Buffering helps the body respond differently to stress without pushing it over the edge. Now, mind you, I said all that to say these categories are not fixed, okay? A person may need a different type of support at different times. Um, and they may need it at different points during the day, okay? So when we answer this question honestly, are we going to soothe, rebuild, or buffer? That's when you can figure out your protocols a little bit better and it helps improve the outcomes, okay? So again, instead of chasing symptoms, we are supporting the nervous system's actual needs in that moment. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming through. I hope this has given some light as to the interconnectedness of the nervous system and how we can help regulate it. I'm gonna say it again. When the nervous system feels safe, the body can repair. Hormones can rebalance. Inflammation decreases and the sleep can return. There are plants that can help us remember this not by forcing the body to change, but reminding it how to rest, how to soften, and how to get back in sync with the universe. I personally offer gratitude to the plants, to our bodies, and to the wisdom that brought you here today, brought me here today, that opened up the space for this conversation to even happen. So, with that, may the medicine you carry forward begin with gentleness, love, compassion, and understanding. Ashe.